Welcome everyone to Sunday morning at the Marxist Library. A quick note before we start, this session is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube with the link on our website at ICSSmarx.org within the next few days. Before the pandemic, this weekly program was hosted at the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library, located on Telegraph Avenue in Oakland, California, USA. During the pandemic, we've been meeting every Sunday morning on Zoom. We have been offering Sunday morning programs for over a decade and a half. You can sign up for email notifications for future programs, view our past programs, and contact us through our website at ICSSmarx.org. We always welcome input, feedback, suggestions for topics, and speakers. My name is Alan Miller, and I'm a member of the program committee that organizes Sunday morning at the Marxist Library. Before we start, we wish to remind everyone that this is a comradely forum for political discourse and debate, and as such, we ask that you show respect to our other participants and for the moderator of today's session. Also note that the opinions expressed are those of the speaker and participants. They do not necessarily represent those of the ICSS or the Marxist Library. Our session today is titled U.S. Imperial Policy in Korea, and our speaker is Simone Chun. Simone is a researcher and activist focusing on inter-Korean relations and U.S. foreign policy on the Korean Peninsula. She has served as an assistant professor at Suffolk University, a lecturer at Northeast University, and associate in research at Harvard University's Korea Institute. Simone is on the board of directors of the Korea Policy Institute, and she can be found on Twitter at Simone Chun. So Simone, thank you for joining us today from, is it sunny Seattle, Washington, or rainy Seattle, Washington today?
It's a beautiful day. Thanks for having me. And it's a great honor to join your forum, whose work is inspired by a great philosopher, revolutionary, and Karl Marx. And I originally, this was I was invited by, as you know, Korea Policy Institute, and this year, as you know, will mark the 73rd anniversary of the official outbreak of the ongoing Korean Wars, and upcoming July 27th will be the 70th anniversary of the Korean War armistice. So I think it's a great forum where we can talk about the historical legacies of the Korean War, and also thinking about the critically examine the emerging new Cold War, and together together think about the alternative paths that we can prevent the new Cold War. And so thank you for having me, and I look forward to today's discussion. So what I want to do is that before we start, because this is our work is inspired by Karl Marx, and I would like to start with the great Polish-German Marxist revolutionary, Rosa Luxemburg. This was, I believe, this quote is from around 1914. This is where she talks about the relationship between war and struggle of working class. And the quote says that the great mass of working people does and must decide the question of war and peace, that this is not a matter of a command from above and the blind obedience from below. We think that wars can only come about so long as the working class supports them enthusiastically. But once the majority of working people come to the conclusion that it is precisely the task of social democracy to arouse the consciousness and to bring them to this conclusion, that wars are nothing but a barbaric, unsocial, reactionary phenomenon entirely against the interests of the people, then wars will have become impossible even if the soldiers obey their command. commanders. I think this is a very important and interesting remark from Rosa Luxemburg. What it says is that the question, as precisely as she suggests, the question of war and peace must decide not by people from above, but by people from below, especially by the working class. Now, here, although the reason why I started with the Rosa Luxemburg with not only was obviously the work that I myself was inspired, but as I reread, I also find there's an interesting caveat. That is, and it made me raise a question. The question is it enough that the organization of the opposition of a working class, is the opposition of working class enough to prevent war? So that is the question that I wanted to start here. In the case of nations that are colonized and under imperial occupation, imperial rule by outsiders, the opposition of a majority of people in that country may not be enough to prevent war. I think that is precisely the case of Korea. So going back to the Korean War, that is the 70th anniversary of the armistice of the Korean War. Now, this war has started 1950 and halted in 1953 with the armistice, and it has never ended, and it is still ongoing. And the important thing about it is that this Korean War is the most consequential war that inaugurated the Cold War and put imperialism at the center of US foreign policy. So that is my argument today, and I hope that we can discuss. So the question that I have here is, can there be peace in Korea? Now, looking at now, when the US is, even at this moment, at a virtual war with China, is it possible? Can there be peace in Korea when specifically South Korea's military is not only controlled by the US, which I will talk more in detail, but also subordinated to what it appears to be an emerging trilateral US, Japan, South Korea military alliance against China? So in other words, there are a great majority of the Koreans oppose war, have opposed war. Is that enough? So what other factor, what other variable is there that trigger Korean War, the state of war, and also forcing Korea into joining into another new Cold War? So that is the question. Can there be peace in Korea when the United States, again, now we're talking about the current situation, under its new Cold War against China, not only imposes sanctions against the North, which has been going on for more than 7 decades, now undermines, try to hobbles the economy of the South by raising the cost of its crucial even trade relations with China. Like the kind of situation the United States, the colony, some more than 250 years ago, where England was uncolonized by Great Britain, and Great Britain said you can only trade with us, and that's how we started the Revolutionary War, the independence of war. A similar situation, the United States basically saying that South Korea should even sanction South Korea. There is trading relations with China. So what I wanted to, so that is the geopolitical context. So what I want to think about is also not only on that US factor, but also within South Carolina, as you will see the more recent political situation. Now we have, Korea is under the most extreme far right president, Yoon Suk-yeol, who was elected last year with the slimmest margin, that is the 0.7%. So what this far-right president has done was systematically capitulating to Washington's anti-China agenda, again, against the wishes against the wishes of the majority of South Koreans, and which is at the expense of the raising risk and also raising the cost of the people. Now, for instance, in April, Yoon Suk-yeol and Biden had a summit, and what came out was the Washington Declaration. What it shows was that South Korea Yoon Suk-yeol was clearly going against South Korean national interest and public opinion, and forcing nations into the Washington's aggressive militaristic push to East Asia, therefore increasing the threat of a global war, and also making this matter, because it is global war, just like the Korean War that started the Cold War. Now it's a new Cold War where Korea is going to be a pivotal part of it. It also, it matters not only for Koreans, but also for American public. I think which probably our participant will have a lot of insight to share. So what I'm arguing is that what I'm proposing is that the greatest threat to peace and stability in Northeast Asia is the US imperialistic quest and military encirclement of China at this point. Therefore, the US peace movement must oppose US imperial policy as a focal point of its struggle, and joins its voice with the South Korean public as they campaign to regain their sovereignty and independence. So that is pretty much the summary of my talk, and I would like to go in a little bit more detail. A little bit mentioning a little bit about the Korean War again, because this is this month is I pointed out 70th armistice anniversary of the armistice Korean War. Now, mentioning a little about the origins is that there are very interesting, important scholarly work on the Korean War that shows not only Korean War, that shows the Korean War had inaugurated the Cold War, and now the Korean War, which which lasted, it's ongoing and lasting for more than 7 decades, is also going to be a pivotal part of triggering another new Cold War with China. So let's first scholar that I want to point it out is Bruce Cummings, who is obviously well-known a historian on Korean War, and in his recent interview, and he said that America divided, and then came the Korean War. In other words, unlike most people, when they say, even if they know about Korea is divided, they will say, oh, Korea must have been divided after Korean War, after the Korean War halted in 1953. No, Korea was divided in 1945 after the end of World War II, when Japan was defeated. As you know, Korea was under brutal Japanese colonization for more than 35 years. So when Japan was defeated, United States came as an occupation force, and divided the Korea. And at the time, the biggest, obviously, the enemy was the Soviet Union. And within that period from 1945 and 1950, June 1950, when the Korean War started, Americans went into the most vigorous and vicious campaign of destroying any Koreans' independent, endogenous nationalist movement to regain their independence and sovereignty. So what they considered is those were all communist. And so that was within 5 years, before even Korean War started, basically American occupying forces have triggered, accelerated the very violent war with the support of the American supported right-wing government. So that's again, the question is the role of, what triggers war what is the factor that sustained the war in country that does not have sovereignty. You point to outsiders. You point to it leads you to the imperialistic outsider. So Bruce Cummings' argument, as makes sense. America divided, then came war. And Bruce Cummings further note, if the U.S. military government and Washington had not intervened according to the U.S. hegemonic strategy, excessively taking one side in South Korea, that means the one side in South Korea means that is taking side with those collaborators of Japanese brutal fascistic imperialism, landowners, those who are the police, and destroying the Koreans, those 90% of Koreans who wanted the sovereignty, who wanted the independence, who wanted to unify the nation. So Bruce Cummings says that if the Americans did not intervene for its own interest, the tragedy of Korea's division would not have come to pass. I think what he says makes sense. And turning to another critical reading, there is in I.F. Stone's The Hidden History of Korean War. Now there is a newer edition with incredible introduction by Tim Bill and Gregory Illich, and I would recommend all of you to, if you haven't not done yet, and check out. And in their introduction to this I.F. Stone was this very amazing American journalist who was writing about the Korean War at the time when it was happening, actually examining the official, sources and the media reports. And what he came out was that he put basically the Korean War was a global war, how the United States played a role in transforming the Civil War into global war. So here's in the introduction to the newer edition of I.F. Stone's, Gregory Illich and Tim Bill says, the eruption of the full-scale war on the Korean Peninsula presented an opportunity to advance U.S. geopolitical interest and those of key Asian clients. Stone situates U.S. role in the Korean War in the context of global Cold War. So in other words, Korean War was, we consider it as sort of forgotten, and it's not really being informed. But it is actually the most pivotal, consequential war because this war made America, even framed America post-Cold World War II American foreign policy. Now, so what came out of the Korean War was the United States, what I would refer to as post-World War II variant of U.S. imperialism. Post-World War II variant of U.S. imperialism at the center of U.S. foreign policy, especially in Asia, particularly in South Korea. So the problem is that when you talk about, if someone mentions U.S. imperialism, of course, people will say, oh no, United States is not imperialist country. What are you talking about? We have all alliances and support democracies, liberal democracies. And look at South Korea has, they have elections. Now, that is why I think it's often when we talk about imperialism, people don't talk about imperialism. It's because even the most critical scholar was just referred to as a hegemonic struggle. But it is U.S. imperialism. That's what. So what I want to do is also want to try to kind of think about define this new variant of U.S. imperialism that has been operating in case of in Korea. So what kind of imperialism is this? As I think Tim and Gregory had was right. This was not the kind of imperialism that Europeans practiced. Even for that matter, Japanese imperialism practice in Japan. They said, they didn't have a flag flying over the governor's palace. Instead, what they have is U.S. military bases. So what happened in Korea was that I'm quoting again, is to supplant European Japanese colonialism and replace it with US dominance. But if even the, in the literature and even critical scholars do not talk about US imperialism. Why? The United States also does not admit, but it is an imperial power. If you identify the problem as an imperial power, what you're going to have to, the strategy has to be to contest that imperialism. And it has to be, the strategy has to be the anti-imperialism, anti-colonialism. So far what I've done was I started with the great quotation from Rosa Luxemburg that shows the relationship between the working class and the war. And I said that, I agree with her, but I think there's a little problem of this traditional Marxist, in that some of those Marxist thinking and analysis were mostly based in European experience. So when you looked at countries like in the third world, non-Western part of the world, where most of their history is about actually that of colonization and imperial domination. So the situation looks very different. What it means is that the majority of people opposed imperial domination, but some, as you can find out, it's hard to end that the state of war. So Korea is a perfect case. Here's the case, as I pointed out, that since the Korean War for the last 70 years, where the United States did not really, Korea did not gain its sovereignty, despite that it has it has gone through all the democratic processes. Now, so let me go more in detail about those three characteristics of the post-World War II variant of US imperialism. The first factor is this type of US imperialism is based on American military bases instead of direct political control, military-based direct political control. Now, for instance, if you can going back again, 1945, United States came to Korea as occupation forces. When Korean Wars halted in 1953 with the Armistice Agreement, they signed what are called ROK US Mutual Defense Treaty. So in the agreement, if you look at it, it said by mutual agreement, grants and United States accept the right to deploy United States Army, Navy, and Air Force in and around Korea. Any place in Korea. So in the US military bases. And there are about more than 62 American bases, and the Pyeongtaek is the latest and the largest and most recent US military bases. And this Pyeongtaek is in fact the largest American military base in the world, and also is the closest to the now the emerging US biggest enemy in China. So United States, and also not only in addition to the 62 bases, now you have if you go to the Jeju Island, the southern part of Korea, it's a beautiful Jeju Island. There is they built a Navy base, which is also be used as US base. And in other words, United States regard Korea as a military colony. So Korea's under this scheme, Koreans give money and give land, and Koreans buy US military weapons and allow almost every part of the land in Korea to be used for American military. So that's the first characteristic of US imperialism in Korea. Now, going to more specifically, that suppose even if you have to, you have military bases, and if you don't have direct control of the military of the country that you are occupying, it will be a different story. But that's not the case in the case of Korea. One of the best work this is, I think that KJ No, who is a brilliant analyst, who also gave a talk in your forum as well. And the KJ was right. He's pointing out that South Korea controlled its own military only from June of 1949 and until July of 1950. And then they turned over their OPCON to the United States. Now, usually the OPCON usually means that it's during time of war. It's very odd that the United States will have the continuous control of OPCON Korean military even after the war was halted. So it's unprecedented. And therefore, United States, what situation that we have when we say that US imperialism, it means the United States has pretty much control of, let's say, really the best and trained Korean troops. That is about 600,000. And also there's 3.1 million Korean reservists, and all military bases, and especially in times of war. So US have to have the control in times of war. So what it is, the United States is, it's free to use all those troops and military forces and bases. And moreover, US has 28,500 active, as you know, troops based in South Korea. And the important thing about this is, again, this is part of US imperialism, because these combined forces and all those bases are not really a defensive posture to defend South Korea, but it is about forming US imperial force, and it is a threat projection platform deployed any place in the world. And to facilitate that, you will see, you have heard so much about it, the US-South Korea joint war games that are held year-round and has increased since the inauguration of the far-right President Yoon Suk-yeol. So the bottom line here is that the consequence of the US imperialism, what is it? It is United States wants to turn South Korea into a permanent military base where troops can be available to operate anywhere on the front line. And I would agree with the KJ No, and it is a subcontractor, in other words, subcontractor in the US new Cold War. Now, because we are, as I stressed earlier, it's very important, it's critical that we focus on what the United States does, and especially what facilitates this imperial expansion. You might want to read this excellent article by Marty Hart Landsberg, who in his recent op-ed, he says it by title U.S. Foreign Policy, a bipartisan embrace militarism. And he points out about the amount of budget allocated on defense, the United States, and compared with other countries that are considered U.S. enemy. And for instance, United 2022 national defense spending was about close to 800 billion, precisely 858 billion. And if you include all those U.S. military bases and all that, and he estimated about it goes over 1.4 trillion. And compare that to China, that spends about 293 billion, and North Korea that spends about 4 billion. Now, so this is important because in the context of U.S. imperial quest that justify U.S. imperialism, say, United States is under the threat. And so it is important to look at the data and who is posing the threat. Now, the second part of the characteristic of the post-World War II variant of U.S. imperialism is reliance on unequal alliances with a vassal state, right? Subordinate states. United States reliance on unequal, not equal, not partnership, unequal alliances with vassal states, such as Korea, such as Japan. Now, here I wanted to give an example of, for instance, the United States has alliance with not only South Korea, but also with the Japan. For instance, if you look at the Japan for the emerging kind of a frontline new Cold War warrior, right? United States has all those military bases in Japan, and also the United States is prompting Japan as to counter against China. So here, the context, if you look at it, by relying on unequal alliances with those vassal states, United States wanted to creating a permanent state of war and the war economy in which military-industrial complex is at the apex. So those are three characteristics of the post-war variant of U.S. imperialism. Again, American military bases instead of direct political control. Second, reliance on unequal alliances with the vassal states, which probably we can talk more about maybe during Q&A. And third, creating a permanent state of war and war economy with the military-industrial complex at apex. Now, I said it's a permanent state of war. Then how do you create permanent state of war? And why is this important? Why is Korea is important in this U.S. scheme of creating permanent state of war? Now here I want to talk about maybe incorporate some of the analysis came off from our recent webinar that I myself organized with Professor Noam Chomsky, where Professor Noam Chomsky talked about how the United States not only creating actually has already started a new Cold War with China. So here's something maybe I will read Chomsky's statement. He says, United States is developing an attack, not impending, but already underway on China. The military dimension includes expanding NATO, but concretely, its official terminology, he said, I will quote the official terminology. Again, this is Chomsky's words, encircling China with the ring of those states, including South Korea, leading all the way to Japan, Australia. And they're heavily armed with US advanced precision weapons. They're all aimed at China. In other words, again, I'm linking to the point why this the U.S. new variant of US imperialism does not have, there's no endpoint. If you look at European imperialism, yes, there was a beginning, maybe there was an end, but the new imperialism has no endpoint. And that is why this new emerging war with China is important. And going back to Chomsky's remark, he says, a war with China would mean the end of humanity. And so there's a couple of people might survive, and obviously we all would agree with them. We got to stop this and shift dramatically from confrontation to accommodation at every level, whether it's North and South Korea and US and China or Europe and Russia. And specifically linking this new Cold War against China and the importance of Korean Peninsula. Washington's new Cold War is a severe threat against South Korea because South Korea is right in the middle of it, which I agree with it. Just like South Korea was right in the middle of the beginning, the inauguration of the Cold War, Korea is right in the middle of the new emerging Cold War against China. So how does it do it? I think it's echoing a lot of scholars that I mentioned before. The United States wants to turn South Korea into permanent military bases. The troops must be available to operate anywhere, which puts South Korea on the front line. In short, South Korea is an occupied country. So what he's referring to as United States imperial policy in South Korea, how that is becoming a facilitator of not only the continuing war, but also the what is going to be the emerging new Cold War. Hence, I think, again, going back to, if I again reiterate those three characteristics of U.S. imperialism: American military bases instead of a direct political control. Second is the reliance on those unequal alliances with the vassal states. And third is the permanent state of war and war economy with the military-industrial complex at the apex and in preparation for this new Cold War. So after reviewing this and looking at the current situation, and obviously the question arises, so what is the, how can you get out of this situation? What is the alternative? How can, and going back to the question that I posed earlier, is it possible, can there be peace in Korea when the US is at a perpetual war with China? When the US, when Korea is still in the midst of the ongoing war. I think one strategy, one alternative is to, again, having rigorously examining the nature, implications of US imperial policy, to look at how South Korea can then regain its sovereignty, independence. Because the great majority of Koreans oppose war. They have opposed military imperialism. They have and they have vigorously, South Korea is known for this vibrant popular resistance. Given that, what else can be done? So here's, I think, specifically, I will reference to, again, my great colleague, KJ No, and he posed a very excellent question. He says that, can we achieve any positive outcome in diplomacy, peace, and reunification when the US is still violating the original conditions of the military armistice between North Korea and the United States, when South Korea does not have sovereign control over its military, meaning that its military is simply an appendage of a US forced projection and geopolitical design. Additionally, the US clearly has no interest in containing, militarizing, escalating towards kinetic war. So what he's implying is that the importance of South Korea's gaining its sovereignty, having specific control over its own military. Given that South Korea, the majority of Koreans, working class, whether it's a middle class, ordinary people, most people already oppose the war, oppose the state of war, oppose the way Americans hegemonic imperial rule. What else should happen? So I think that is a critical point. Now, so the question is, as you know, is to me, how to free Korea from its neo-colonial relations with United States. I'm framing like this because you're going to hear a lot about throughout this month. You're going to hear a lot about the atrocities of Korean or unending Korea, which I myself have said so many times even in this talk. Just Korean War itself, focusing on Korean War itself is not enough, and also moreover to some of those more liberal approach, that is this more like a disarmament approach. Arms reduction approach, even the peace movement itself is not going to be far enough, because what you're doing is you are asking permission, appeal to the American imperialists who have refused to give a peace for the last 7 decades. Even for the last, as you can, for the recent period of rapprochement under Trump and Moon Jae-in, we have learned a great lesson. America has absolutely no interest in ending that state of war and giving peace in Korea. Given that it's endless asking approval, permission, appeal to American elite, the agents of in military industrial complex, agents of starting this new Cold War against China. I don't think it's going to be enough. If they have not given us for the last 7 decades, it's kind of it's very thoughtful. So the question that we have here is, I think we have to ask ourselves, I think including myself as a Korean, how can Korea can free itself from the fundamental the root cause, that is the neo-colonial relationship with the United States. So that is, I don't have all the answer, but I just wanted to not only asking questions to myself, but also learn from others as well. Now here, I think this question is also related with the people living in the United States and progressive in the United States. I think here I would like to make reference to another brilliant colleague, Christine Hong, professor at UC Santa Cruz, and during our discussion with Noam Chomsky, and she said she raised a question, such a profound, brilliant question. It's because so far I talked about only Korea and East Asia. And now we're moving in a way right here in Oakland and Seattle, and how to transform Asia and the Pacific into a people's Asia and a people's Pacific. And what role can people in the United States play it? Right? Because another thing is, it's not just happening, things happening, words happening out there. We are a lot of, especially in this part of United States, Northwest, and also the California, there's a lot of Asian descent, Koreans. So we are part of this greater Asia. The Great Asia that is at this point is turning into this called the new Indo-Pacific plan, and it's all now turned toward completely disregarding the people's interest, turning to basically it's part of another world. So going back to Christine Hong's question, so I'll just read her the comment and then I will make a note. And this is where she talks about how starting with the very profound statement interview that she did with the South Korean peace activist, and who said, this was like more than 10 years ago, and he said that Koreans have had like full lifetime of war, which is true. Right? And I myself, I was obviously born after Korean War, but we have most Koreans have basically, our existential question is basically living in a state of war, and people in Korea understand that, and in the United States, people may not have a full understanding. And then Christine Hong says that, so she said, the person she interviewed, Korean activist, he says, isn't it high time that we conclude peace through our own efforts? In fact, I will add that our own terms. Now, I'm saying this because, as I earlier, a minute ago, I pointed out that, all those peace activists, including a great peace activists, inspiring peace activists, we constantly appealing to US Congress, Biden do this, US Congress do this. Can we make a peace through our own effort, through our own terms? I'll go back to Chris Nunn. And the Korean peace activists said that it is hard. Why? Because South Korea's geostrategic utility to US imperial design. And Korea is, in this case, as you can see, the common thread is very useful because Korea is the weakest accelerator of US imperial quest. So US is not going to give up. It's an occupier. Noam Chomsky said Korea is an occupied country. The Korean South Korean peace activist said it's occupier of South Korea. So it's a challenge. And Christine, she raised the question then, how can we, though, given this under this structural hindrance, how can we then transform and also even strengthen the work that we have done, so far, and the work that you are doing right now, including those peace activist work? How can we transform Asia and the Pacific into People's Asia and the People's Pacific? I think that is the excellent question, especially in the context of now the one that I mentioned, new Cold War in the Pacific, this imperial U.S. design, and a lot of Asian nations, even Australia, New Zealand, Taiwan, people in China, people in Japan, they are becoming assigned the role of a cannon fodder. Under some variant of sort of self-fascistic political rule. So in other words, in this context, here I think Christine Hong says she was, at this point, she was referring to Noam Chomsky's point, and how the U.S., this liberalism, U.S. great liberalism can coexist well with the institutionalized fascist under U.S. tutelage in those countries that under unequal alliances with the United States. So going back to the question, I said, how can Korea be free from its neo-colonial relationship with the United States? I think what I'm suggesting is we need you. We need Americans. We need not only just the peace activists, we need just like you, those radical Marxist, revolutionary, progressive thinkers and activists that we need you. Korea cannot do alone. And specifically supporting Korea's quest for independence by rigorously analyzing U.S. imperial rule and the ramification and consequences of the U.S. imperial. So I pointed out about, because the reason why I also review a lot of our American grades analysts is because that's the work that we're doing here. And I'm also using their work because I reference those work because I most benefited from their work. That's why, in a way, my tribute to their commitment. Now I want to go back to, maybe I'll take you to Korea. Yeah. I said, again, going to how to free Korea from the neo-colonial relationship with the United States. One interesting path that we want to think about is called the South Korean national liberationist approach. National liberation approach. What it is that, to give a maybe, I can talk more about later about specific in South Korea. what it is that in South Korea, obviously, because South Korea is a country of a great, history of genealogy of popular resistance. We all know that. The most recent that you're most familiar with, probably, Candlelight Revolution, that led to impeachment of the former President Park Geun-hye, and which led to the President Moon Jae-in, liberal President Moon Jae-in, and then now after 5 years, unfortunately, we are now back to the right-wing hawkish administration. But nevertheless, South Koreans have never stopped resisting, right? Protest, labor movement. It's the most vibrant culture of a protest. So I'll be interested in talking all of them, but one movement that I want to point to as a national liberation activist. So national liberation activist approach is that they are part of trade union and the social democratic movement. But their argument is that the progressive in South Korea, right? Progressive in South Korea, those even unions and workers have different duty and different challenge. That is, unlike other countries, that they believe that they have to work towards ending, right? Ending resisting anti-imperialism, ending the neo-colonial relationship with the United States. Another, what they were saying is that it's not just enough to struggle for fair wages, improving working conditions, etc. That is important, but that's not enough, because South Korea has a very unique condition. It is divided. It is under imperial rule. It has a semi-colonial relationship with the United States. So the role of South Korean progressive, the role of popular resistance in South Korea must involve resisting anti-imperialism. So let me quote this interview that I did really long time ago. It was during my research for my PhD. And, I did write a dissertation on called the globalization and the new progressive party, new left party in Korea. At the time, that was about 2005. I mean, it sounds like a long time ago, but anyway. So for that research, I went to Korea and I interviewed a lot of these union workers and union members, workers, and the Labor Party. So at the time, the context was that it's like for the first time in South Korea history, the party that has the labor in it, like Korean Democratic Labor Party, was forming. So I thought I must witness this, the birth of this brand new Labor Party. So I was into all those workers, and so I met. So there's even within the party, there's a lot of different approaches. So one is called national liberation. So this activist, he was actually a bit high-ranking, high-ranking member in that Labor Party. He says the Progressive Party in Korea has another duty, which progressive parties in other countries do not have. That is working towards the unification of a divided Korea. Divided Korea represents a particular responsibility for the progressive movement here. The Progressive Party in Korea has duty that progressive parties in other countries do not have. And again, right, working toward unification of divided Korea. In other words, he said the Progressive Party in divided Korea cannot limit itself simply to representing the people who are excluded from political and economic power. Political party represents a strategic tool for freeing Korea from neo-colonial relationship with the United States. The supreme objective of the party is unification. All our efforts, the student movement, labor movement, penetration into local community, and creation of a political party, they're all carefully planned and subordinated to the goal of unification and anti-imperialism. So that's what he's saying is, in a way, kind of this time all the way to the very first quotation that I did, Rosa Luxemburg. He says how the working class oppose. There's not going to be war. Right? That's important. But when you look at those countries that are colonized, that is obviously not. Korea is certainly very different from European countries. For that matter, a lot of you are probably Americans working in the labor movement. It's also different. Korea is different from American worker struggle. So Korea is different from because of its experience during the Cold War and also because of its division. Thus, in the case of again going back to the question of how to bring about peace in Korea, you must analyze the U.S. role, specifically U.S. imperial role, and also the strategy, that effective strategy, right, ought to include resisting the very core of that sustains U.S. imperial rule by empowering Koreans who try to regain their sovereignty, try to end the division, try to terminate this neo-colonial relationship with the United States. Now, so how is this related to, again, to your audience and those in the United States? Yes, it is important for us to understand Korean War itself, which itself is a huge task. It is important to lobby Congress, to appeal to Congress, to work with the even including those who appeal for this arms control approach. But more importantly, it is very important for us to radicalize our strategy, to not be afraid of challenging the core of the root cause, that is U.S. imperialism, and most importantly, to empower those Koreans who are right now, actually, I could show some of those video later, who are right now protesting against U.S. Year-round U.S. Korea military games, U.S. occupation, and also to appeal to not just to the elite but to the rest of the world how important Korea's quest for national liberation and independence is in the context of for the purpose of ending this U.S. imperialism which I argue, hypothesized, that was born in the aftermath of the start of Korean War, that has three important characteristics: the military base, those unequal alliances, and the perpetual, no end. There's no termination in the U.S. imperialism, but it's a permanent war, permanent military industrial complex. Okay, I went way over to the time, so let me pause here.
It's a great time to pause. No, not bad at all in terms of timing. What we're going to do now is we're going to transition over to question and answers from participants. What I want to do is ask those who are online right now to go down to the reactions button and raise your hand if you have questions or comments on the subject, and we'll spend some time answering those. Put your hand up. I'll try to get people in the order in which you raise your hand. Before we do that, though, I want to switch over to a few announcements. First of all, let's see, next week we have a very interesting speaker from the United Kingdom, Manchester, England, Alexander McKay from the Marx, Engels, Lenin Institute will be speaking on Putin and NATO. We'll be giving a Marxist-Leninist analysis of the war in Ukraine and Putin and his role in Russian society. I don't know how many of you have actually heard him speak, but he is one of the most interesting political analysts that I've heard recently speaking on the subject. I want to encourage people to join us next week and hear some very in-depth and rich analysis of what's taking place in Russia and between Russia and NATO and in Ukraine today. Following that, we're going to have a talk on the farmers movement. And Raj, if you would just give a quick summary of Badabrata's talk on the 23rd. Raj, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, yes, thank you. So 2 weeks from now, we will have a filmmaker who has spoken in our forum, Badabrata Pine. He is a filmmaker and he has produced a documentary on the farm crisis in the United States. Many of you know about the farm crisis, farmers movement in India 2 years ago, which forced the government to back off. And but the same thing had happened in 1980s when Reagan came to power, and he will show what happened to American farmers. So I think that's very important discussion, and his film is available. I think he will provide where it can be seen. So that's 2 weeks from now.
Okay, following that, we have a speaker on July 30th confirmed. Norman Finkelstein will be speaking, wrote a very interesting book. I'll burn that bridge when I get to it. He'll be speaking about kind of tying domestic politics in the US to the war in Ukraine. Very, very good. I want to urge everybody to put that on your calendar, and should be a very good session. If you're interested in receiving email notifications for future sessions, you can go to our website at ICSSmarks.org, and a dialog box will pop up if you come to the website, and you can put your name and your email address in, and we will send you weekly notifications of upcoming programs. You can also view past programs. We have an archive going back about 10 years now of video recordings of past programs, and many of them are very, very interesting. They're all on the website. And finally, if you wish to contact us, there's a contact form where you can send us a message, and we'll respond with suggestions, criticisms, comments, etc. So now what I'd like to do is shift over to the discussion part of our session. And I'm going to start by, I'm going to call on people in order. I'm going to start with Richard, followed by Janet, followed by Jean. So Richard, if you would unmute yourself and let me go ahead and change that setting so we can allow you to do that. Go ahead, Richard. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Already? That's quick. Simone, thank you for your presentation. I've got to say, you may know him. I'm pretty sure you know him. I'm good friends with a guy by the name of Tim Shorrock, who's a journalist in the about Asian sphere. And he got me out to University of Oregon, where I finished up my undergraduate schools. My question is, you started off your presentation with a thing from Rosa Luxemburg, right now there is a around this in particular around this the Ukraine special military operation war, whatever you want to call it. There seems to be an appeal to on one side of progressives, an appeal to the working class unity. My question is this: given that so much of the working class in this country work for military industrial related industries or corporations or and at universities, what does that mean, and how do we approach those people? How do we get them away from not necessarily career per se, but from recognizing how do we break them from this mindset of U.S. imperialism? Thank you.
Simone, you're going to be asked questions about Korea and domestic U.S. politics. Go ahead and go for it.
I think that Rosa Luxemburg's actually statement is more. Am I muted or am I?
You're on. You're
okay.
okay.
I think actually, although I started with Luxemburg's statement, I also pointed out how Luxemburg's statement is limited in the more Western European context, and the Korea situation is different. Korean situation, there's a working class. Not only do they have to fight against the capitalist, the bourgeoisie, they also have to fight against this the divided Korea, the U.S. imperialism that perpetuate the cost and perpetuate the division, as a result of also creating incredibly for majority of Korea's history the very repressive regime, which also only ended by Koreans' popular struggle, and also continue even right now. As I pointed out earlier, the Yoon Suk-yeol, the right-wing administration is actually probably I didn't point out, it was actually heavily supported by Biden administration. So the Democrats love the Korean neo-fascist regime. Now, so Koreans working class have double jeopardy, double challenges, not only against the capitalist exploitation, but also against this very repressive fascistic national security regime. So they're different. About the United States, working class do not have that problem, the semblance of liberal democracies, if you wish. And so for that matter, I think it's a great thing. American working class can't obviously, it is, as Rosa Luxemburg said, it is a fact. Words counter against the interest of working class, and the amount of money that we all know that's spent on giving to Zelensky. I mean, it could go to improving the lives of ordinary people in Auckland or in Seattle or whatnot, right? That's just, there's simple math we can all do. I think people are already doing it. So I think so, and also in terms of but despite although I said the Korean workers have a different set of challenges, but as Marx or Rosa Luxemburg or Lenin, the great revolutionary pointed out that of course there is a common shared interest among all workers around in the world. Simply the fact that the means of productions are basically owned by the capitalist class, and also especially in this time of globalized economy, where the financial global economic capitalists are pretty much dominating. It's not even, to some extent, it's not even capitalist economy. It is what they call the casino economy, or the I wouldn't go further in that direction because we will go in tandem. But the point is that it is it will be in fact it's an excellent opportunity for the workers around the world to talk about how war is the common enemy. War in Ukraine, war in Korea, the border war in US, Mexico, all wars. They're common enemies of all working class in all over the world. So I think in that sense, I think that, we can talk more about it. I'm probably can talk, this is so interesting, we'll talk about for the next 24 hours. But I think this is, it is a challenge, but I would say this is a great opportunity for, so American, that's what I said. I said in my talk, I said, Koreans need American workers, American unions. And, although American unions, my impression is pretty kind of conservative. And like many trade unions in the capitalist country, they tend to be like they're actually, they also can be a warmonger. They support the war because it can be good for the country, but not. But the point is that I think yes, there are incredible opportunities for the creating the shared raising the consciousness, the shared interest among the working class. And I think this is precisely the role of, as Rosa Luxemburg said, is precisely the role of social democrats and us to raise consciousness, to spread the word.
Thank you. Next is Janet, and then I think I'm going to go to Mark and then Jean. So Janet, if you would please ask your question.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. I first wanted to just mention something about Richard's question. So the U.S. arms industry is huge, but it's an industry to perpetuate U.S. imperialism. And so we could have a whole other program about that, the arms industry, and Russian arms industry also. They're trying to defend against U.S. imperialism, and their workers are also manufacturing arms. Anyway, Simone, thank you for your presentation. I'm a little confused about you. You referred to Korea throughout, and I'm wondering whether you mean South Korea when you say Korea and not the whole, North Korea and South Korea. Could you clarify that? But I have some other questions. I'm wondering why you didn't talk more about North Korea and how its population feels about this whole situation. Can you talk also about how South Koreans feel about North Korea's nuclear weapons? And then finally, you talked about how the South Korean people, they don't support going to war, but yet they elected this right-wing president. Would you talk about the role propaganda plays in South Korea and how that influences the population there? Thank you.
Okay, but yes, I'm referring to South Korea, and I didn't talk much about North Korea because that will be probably a whole another session in itself. So in that sense, and also when I said that this precisely is U.S. imperial policy in Korea, it means U.S. imperial policy in this case will be applied to, because Korea is divided, it will apply to only South Korea. So the North Korea, about the people in North Korea, population, what North Korea, people in North Korea will think about are, that will be, obviously, it will be difficult for me to speculate because the obvious reason that I am, the two Koreas have very limited engagement, actually virtually no engagement in terms of the people to people. I mean, I myself, I have met in my lifetime about 10, maybe 12 North Koreans, and so it's a tragedy, as you can see. So what about North Korea? You will hear, and there's a lot of, you can find it all the media how the way what about North Korea, and I think the mainstream media will say North Korea is, obviously it's under the tyrannical regime and all that stuff. But again, I think for the sake of, I guess, discussion, I think my hope was to look at the origin of that's whatever bad things happening in North Korea, the origin of that condition, that is North Korea under the pretty much economic embargo for more than 7 decades, constant threat of war, nuclear war, actually, by the United States. As you know, the United States, the armistice agreement that signed in 1953 says that you cannot introduce any new, weapons. But the United States, the first thing the United States did was to violate a very clause in the armistice by introducing, new weapons, and also even posing nuclear threat. Before even North Korea developed its nuclear programs, United States has the nuclear weapons based in South Korea, which only ended in 1989. Now, so I'll be happy to talk more about North Korea maybe another time. But the point being, the goal of this webinar was to look at the origins of that horrible condition that North Korea is in, and also people in South Korea. What people in South Korea think about North Korea? According to the poll, when Moon Jae-in was, our previous liberal president, before this right-wing neo-fascist President Yoon, when Moon Jae-in was trying to do that peace initiative rapprochement, when Trump was up in power, and there was a great summit, inter-Korean and also U.S. PPRK summit. According to the poll, 80% of Koreans had a favorable opinion of Kim Jong-un because that was for the first time they saw actually the North Korean leader, the young fellow, and what that means 80%. And also the 80% of Koreans supported the inter-Korean rapprochement, inter-Korean communication and negotiation, and also the US DPRK summit. And so what that means is that no matter what kind of poll that you see, the bottom line that undercurrent, very strong current in South Korea, Koreans feel that they are one nation. It's like Germans, right? When they were divided, right? East and West Germans. And it is, they speak the same language. I think there's one of my favorite thing that to me was of foreign, commentators. The one that appealed to most to me is that makes sense is that, actually more than Pope Francis. Pope Francis said that, he talked about, he came to Korea, was it 7 years ago or something? And he said something about, he said that the Koreans, you guys have North and South Korea, you guys speak the same language, the Korean, right? So you mean, what Korean, what we call mother tongue, right? So what do you mean? Korean means that you're same mother, you're from the same mother tongue. So what I'm saying is that, if you look at an opinion poll right now, you look at most of the opinion poll done by conservative right-wing media, there's the Koreans, think North Korea's enemy. Yes, they are. We think the Americans, without having any, direct experience with the China, they think that China is like the biggest enemy. So what I'm saying is the undercurrent, that is what is unspoken, what is shared, is the Korea is one nation. That's the way I feel. I think probably 80% of those people who had supported the inter-Korean rapprochement feel. Nuclear weapons, yes, again, mainstream opinion poll, you see the Koreans are, they are nuclear weapons, North Korean nuclear weapons is the biggest threat to the entire world and all that, right? So you will get that in the mainstream media. So what is actually then the purpose of my talk is, again, what is the root cause of this called nuclear, North Korea's nuclear threat? And country that has $4 billion national budget as opposed to United States 1.4 trillion, and United States has the most nuclear weapons, has the most military bases around the world, round the clock military exercise. So suppose you want to be, you're a North Korean leader, do you just sit alone, just doing nothing, or are you trying to defend yourself? Especially when you were, for 35 years, you were colonized, brutally colonized by Japanese, 200,000 Korean underage girls, served as military sex slaves by Japanese. So it's like Koreans learned what it's like to be under the imperial condition. We experienced, we felt in our body. We felt, my mom remember, my dad remember, my grandfather, remember. It's you have a physically experience. And going back to North Korea, completely, I referenced those great work by I.F. Stone, Bruce Cummings, Tim Bill, Greg Illich, North Korean were completely obliterated. Americans, the carpet bombings of the Korea, especially North Korea, there's not a single thing during that, the campaign that remained is completely obliterated. So when you physically experience that, so what is after experiencing 35 years of raping and brutal colonization, what is the most important thing? It's even beyond any ideology or Marxism or Leninism or communism, whatnot. You do not want to be subjected to that cycle, that kind of condition. That's called the, so you want your sovereignty. I think that is, I think that in that sense, I think we can understand why North Korea is so really, wanting to defend itself, including developing nuclear. About Koreans, I think, again, these are really excellent questions. Koreans, I said Koreans, yes, they are majority of them. We have vibrant popular culture and resistance, and Koreans, oppose the war and all that. Then, why did you vote for Trump? That's the main question, right? How did you possibly elect this man, Yoon Suk-yeol, especially in the aftermath of this great candlelight revolution, right? Candlelight revolution, you remember that impeached Park Geun-hye. Do you know that literally like more than 60% of Koreans participate every single Saturday, right? They participate in this candlelight protest for 2 years. That led to the impeachment. So, but again, your excellent question, how, after you did that, how did you possibly elect this guy who within a year, who completely reversed all those policies, now becoming the most right-wing, hawkish, neo-fascistic, regime? And I mentioned that by the way, he was elected by slimmest margin, right, 0.7%. Which in itself is an interesting discussion. What happened was Korea is, one is there is a massive, as you can see, the role of media, there's very heavily, as you can, even like United States, Fox News and all that, that is very, the oligarchic sort of control of media by the chaebol, the Korean corporations, and also right-wing groups. And also within the opposition, yes, there was a division within the let's say the Soviet United Democrat. Within the Democrat, there's a division between the Biden and the more progressive part. And so basically, Yoon Suk-yeol was, basically was almost like it was created a strategic opportunity for the right wing to unify, and being elected to that with the slimmest margin. But one more point I want to mention, though, is that this is a speculation that I don't think that there was any report in the U.S. media, though. Yoon Suk-yeol, he was the chief prosecutor before he would not the president. He was chief prosecutor in South Korea under President Moon Jae-in, the liberal president. Moon Jae-in actually appointed Yoon Suk-yeol. Thought that this guy is going to be the great, he's going to be champion, the reforming the Korea justice system, which is in itself is very, it's the most corrupt system. So the story is that when Yoon Suk-yeol became the national chief prosecutor, he got visited from CIA and FBI. And the story is speculation is that United States wanted to have right-wing administration after Moon Jae-in. And there was even before he decided to run, it was basically Yoon Suk-yeol was supported by United States, the establishment. I have not done any research, but there's enough evidence that shows. So in other words, United States, the point is that as I said, Korean national politics cannot be explained only by what's happening within Korea. It has to be explained with its relation with the United States. And United States does not support liberal progressive administration, period. United States during the last rapprochement, Moon Jae-in, every step of the way, United States tried to subvert, obstruct any inter-Korean rapprochement. That is the bottom line. That is in a way why Trump failed miserably too. And the reason why U.S. wants to have more this, it's a perfect, like a dream come true, Yoon Suk-yeol. Why? Because United States does not have to do anything. Yoon Suk-yeol, this right-wing regime will take care of whatever the United States, wants to, having perfect hawkish, anti-North Korean, anti-peace, pro-US administration that can, implement enthusiastically, just like Zelensky, enthusiastically implement the US imperial policy. So in that sense, again, going back to the, my point, yes, Korea's domestic situation, yes, Koreans are great in popular, mobilization, but it's limited.
Okay, next is Mark, if you would unmute yourself, followed by Jean. So Mark, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Simone, I've been giving a talk on the Korean situation myself for the 70th anniversary of the ceasefire. It's not a peace treaty, it's a ceasefire. It's called Ceasefire Korea. And I've been hitting this more in a military fashion from a perspective. If you understand the United States Army military doctrine over the years, I'm talking years ago, it was, and this is Army doctrine, you defeat an enemy army, you destroy an enemy army to bring the opposing power to the conference table. Now, this worked in 1865, it worked in 1918, and it worked in 1945. You're going to see a change on the night, and it's a particular night in particular, and it's during the Korean War. The night of November 25, 26, 1950, when 300,000 Chinese volunteers, they're called, entered the Korean War. Now, a war that could have been over November, December 1950 is going to descend eventually into trench warfare like 1914, 1918 France, and no one's going to go anywhere. But where does this lead to for the United States? Military defeat in Vietnam, defeat in Afghanistan, defeat in Iraq. The United States Army really hasn't won a war since 1945. I'm not going to count that 4-day cakewalk against Saddam in February of 91. And the end up here would be, take a look at what's going on. You folks brought up before here about the money being spent on the Defense Department, but flip it around. Take a look at the other side here. The Army was supposed to had a recruiting goal in 2022 of 60,000. They got 45,000. The Navy just squeaked by, but they think they're going to be 6,000 short this year. They have 3,900 recruiters. They want them to work 6 days a week now, not 5. The Coast Guard has not hit their recruiting goal in 4 years. They're almost 5,000 down. The Navy has raised the recruiting age now to 41. The Army is thinking of going higher than 35. Now, interesting here too with the Navy, an enlistment bonus can get you $50,000 to enlist. On top of that, they have a cap on $65,000 on elimination of your student loan debt. That means if you're enterprising enough, you can join the Navy and get 115 grand. How do you like that? But the problem here is many Americans no longer want to fight. So you have to call into question from this perspective, why all the trillions of dollars, right? Which also leads to the reality here that the Ukrainian army is America's proxy army. The professionals will fight. There's not enough of them. So this is a problem that the services are having right now, the recruiting goals. Interesting.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I would just add to that. I think that's actually a nice comment, because that's why, 600,000 Korean, military personnel on duty, the world best, best trained. They're Americans use them. Right? So in that sense, that that's why country like Korea, where America is one of the largest military bases, and also the active military personnel on duty. That is very important. At the end, you're talking about, when we're talking about war, we're talking about manpower.
Right.
Manpower, not the especially the best trained manpower like the Korean army. So America has, truly, that's why Korea is so important in that sense. So I think that's an excellent comment.
Okay, next is Jean, followed by Rich J, followed by Youssef. So Jean, please go ahead.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Simone, for being here and giving us this talk, and thank you for your talk, which is really good, and I really support what your point of view and everything you're saying there. And just say that I'm wearing my Veterans for Peace cap, and our mission as veterans is to restrain our government from intervening in the internal affairs of other governments, which we do our best on that, but clearly we're not doing a very good job. And, in terms of the results of US imperialism, what that is on the effects of the nations, we just have to look at Ukraine and what's going on in Ukraine. And we certainly don't want to wish that for any part of Asia. And, US imperialism in Asia goes way back. I think to the Opium Wars, the aptly named Opium Wars, which were to push opium on the Chinese people, and led to the century of humiliation and the reassociation of People's China, the People's Republic of China, just like we have the People's Republic of Korea, Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Again, it's a People's Republic, not a capitalist, imperialist government in both cases. So I just wanted to make those comments. And I noted, getting on the issue of nuclear weapons, I think we're all opposed to nuclear weapons, but I think for North Korea, as for China, weapons play a somewhat different role. And I know in China, I think Mao said, we need to have this thing if we don't want to be bullied. And the North Koreans also don't want to be bullied. There was someone made a statement, I think here, we've had him here, that, a real revolutionary would rather die on his feet than live like a dog on his knees. And the North Koreans have never gotten down on their knees to US imperialism. So I think they deserve our respect. But again, the Chinese, when they developed their nuclear weapons, made it quite clear, they stated they would never use these weapons first in the event of a war. And they also took all their weapons off launch on warning, so that, United States, as soon as we see even a pigeon flying into our airspace, we're ready to launch a nuclear war. But the Chinese are not. So they have a much different policy there. So I don't know if I'd like to respond to that. Again, in terms of the role partly of North Korea, that's really, I think, they're standing up to US imperialism, and I think they deserve our respect in that regard. So again, thank you for being here. Really enjoyed your talk. Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, next is Rich, followed by Youssef, followed by Raj. So Rich, please go ahead. Rich J.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you very much for your, not just your presentation today, but your preparation, your research, all the work you've done to come to this point where you can share your analysis and viewpoint on, among other things, U.S. imperialism and our relationship to a long relationship with Korea, North and South. I think, as Eugene just said, I couldn't find anything he said that I don't agree with. I do want to say a couple things personal and directly related to what we're doing here. I was lucky enough, or strangely, strange situation. In 1961, I was 16 years old, and I went to Korea, the Far East, with a jazz band and played in South Korea. And then in 1971, 10 years later, I was home from 3 years in the military in Germany in the U.S. Army, and I experienced this. Well, I became anti-war activist. The Vietnam was my first serious political experience, and I opposed the Vietnam War. But I also met a fellow named Andy Truskier, who was part of the staff or the founders of a publication called The War Bulletin, produced in Berkeley around 1970, 71, 72. And Andy Truskier made personal trips to, I don't know about South Korea, but North Korea, and discussed and studied and shared with us what he learned about Kim Il-sung and Juche, which you very softly referred to North Korean. Like you said, it's not your study, it's not the research you've done directly, and you've met 10 or 12 North Koreans. But I would first, as a member of the planning committee, personally, not through the committee, invite you to come back to speak to us. I know everybody will agree with me what I'm saying right now. I can feel it. I would like you to come back and speak about what you do know or what you can find about North Korea, Kim Il-sung, the history up through the generations, and Juche, as Uncle Hu said. The other thing I want to say is that what Andy said in the group, the War Bulletin staff, that we were all engaged in the anti-Vietnam War movement. But what Andy said was, what happened in Korea that we didn't learn about, that we didn't have our press cover, etc., was as bad or worse than, I can't say the exact words, but comparable to the Vietnam War, which we were all engaged in opposing then, realizing what we were doing to the Vietnamese. And you're sharing with us, starting to begin to share with us, what we also did in Korea, before Vietnam War, anti-U.S. war in Vietnam started. So in general, I just want to say thank you very much. I can't say it well enough. I can't say enough for your presentation, for once more opening our eyes. And I would say, if we find 5 or 10 more people like you, as articulate, as well-researched, and able to discuss with us, straighten out for us our real history, that we might have a chance. We need more than one. We need a bunch of you. We can't have too many. Speaking from a women's point of view, thank you very much for the
Rich.
loss of the Vietnamese women, for the North Korean, for the Korean women that we lost. We're just learning about that right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I just maybe as a quick response to that? And I thank you so much for your comment. And I myself, actually, I want to say how much I appreciate all the work peace activists from all different groups in United Americans are doing. Now, here is the thing, what I think about American peace activists. American peace activists have the longest history of anti-war movement. Am I not, correct, right?
I hear you.
So that's, I have experience, they have expertise, all that, history. And that's why when I say, when Koreans need, or the rest of the world needs more than ever, Americans' involvement, is because America happened to have, it's the imperial, yes, it is imperial country. That's why every war since, 20th century was it's American war. And Americans have every single, those words that trigger, that Americans studied, Americans also responded. American peace activists always involved. So what I'm saying is that American peace text has the most to contribute, especially in this time. So I think in this, I think I really, appreciate the comment that you make. And about the North Korea, yes, I'll be, my dream was when I met those, I said 12 or 13 North Koreans that I met in my lifetime. I once, it was truly, it's a very, almost like a surreal that we looked at each other, we looked like, oh my God, you could be like my brother, you could be my uncle, right? And I'm in the tone of that. And one conference that I went to, the whole time we're speaking in English. And at one point we looked at each other, look at it, and then we start speaking in Korean. And it was like, oh my God, you're just, so all that, you're Korean. And especially, I think the person like me who's, who I am post-war generation, educated by Korea's repressive regime, believe it or not, I was a thoroughly received the anti-North Korean, anti-communist indoctrination. That is about the South Korean. In fact, I received the most prestigious scholarship from no other than the Park Chung-hee, and he's who ruled from 1961 to 1979, was assassinated, the dictator, right? His fellowship that is inspired from his fellowship. Now, so what I'm saying is that it's hard for Koreans, people in South Korea, to know what's really going on in North Korea, right? So I think it's as many pointed, this is the worst. I would say, I want to point out, I think in upcoming, this month throughout, you will see a lot of Koreans, especially Korean Americans, who has family members still in North Korea, relatives. Imagine that your grandfather, your grandmother, your families, in North Korea, you have not been able to see for the last, 60 years and forever. Now you're about to die. What kind of life is that? Right? So I don't have that kind of personal experience. What I'm trying to emphasize is that before I said I don't want to appeal to American elite, but I want to appeal to American people, right? As a family, as a friends, as a fellow human beings, right? As this family member, right? Korean War means that Korea means it's the worst humanitarian catastrophe in the 20th century. Now is way over 21st century. And Americans, people like you, can do something about it. Why? Not because, all this, we have great ideas, but because American peace activists, just like veterans of peace, have the most experiences, expertise, and commitment, and know-how. Thank you for your comment.
Okay, next is Yusuf, followed by Raj, followed by Norma. So Yusuf, if you would unmute yourself, please.
Thank you. I'm Turkish, so I want to make some comment about the Turkish troops in the Korean War. Turkey was under a conservative right-wing pro-capitalist government at the time, and the troops were sent without a correct parliamentary procedure. But anyway, people generally know that the Turkish soldiers fought bravely and so on and so forth. But that's only part of the story. When Turkey entered the Korean War, the Turkish troops were sent to the front line immediately. And this soon after coincided with the DPRK, aided by China, counteroffensive. And soon after, the American force and other allied forces were given the order to withdraw. But it was not communicated to the Turkish forces. So the Turkish forces kept on fighting, and they did. At that time, they were used to following orders no matter what. And they fought well, and the Americans and other allies, escaped with only light casualties. And then afterwards, they apologized, said, good job, sorry there was a error in communication. But anyway, this led to many of the officers and soldiers who served there later formed the nucleus of the anti-NATO movement within the armed forces. The second in command in Korea initiated a coup against the government, which led to liberalization. Some people will disagree on this, but anyway, and one of the first acts of the military government was to withdraw Turkish troops from Korea, much to the objection of the Americans. And apparently they were very rude had to be very rude to the American ambassador to stop pestering them. And later, this second in command, Madanoğlu, he had the reputation of being the leader of a left-wing anti-imperialist conspiracy. And in the 60s and 70s, there was massive anti-NATO movement in Turkey. So I wanted to add this perspective footnote, shall I say.
Thank you, Yusuf. Okay, so we only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to call on Raj, Norma, then Sharon. So Raj, if you would unmute yourself and please go ahead and try and let's keep them to 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Simone. As I see, American and Western capitalist power is weakening. It is not strengthening, and a multipolar world is slowly rising. And the United States trying to prevent it, and in trying to prevent it, it is waging wars, trying to strengthen its control on China and Russia. But I think it's going to fail, in my opinion. How do you see this, and how does it affect, in your mind, the objective of decolonization of South Korea and integration with the North, which I think has to happen, and the two Koreas should unite. That I think will be the proof of defeat of imperialism. So how do you see it? This multipolar world arising, or do you not believe in it? Some comments on that, I'll appreciate it. Thank you, and thank you very much for your talk.
I think that's indeed that's excellent comment. In fact, I should have included. And yes, definitely, we are in what we are looking at is, as many pointed out, including yourself, it is the contest between the multipolar, which led in part by China and the great other countries and the United States that want the unipolar system, and United States will try to stop any movement towards multipolarity. So that is a fact. So how does Korea fit into that role? At this point, what's happening now in Korea is that Korea is under Yoon Suk-yeol administration. He is completely, joining the U.S. scheme, U.S. platform of, unipolar, right? And playing that sort of subcontract role of the U.S. plan. Now, that is obviously, I agree with the many, that is against the Korea's interest. So Korea's, the path ought to be Korea's joining those movements, those countries that are trying to create multi-polar world, meaning it doesn't necessarily have to be China, but obviously China is the biggest entity. And there's all the Greek countries that are doing it. And also even many European countries, even, countries like France, they also not always agreeing with Biden. So Korea should join movement towards multipolarity, democratize this global order. So that is the path that Korea must take. In fact, Korea's under previous liberal administration, as you know, that we're trying to, they trying to play actually the role of becoming the sort of a pivot of creating that, multipolar. But now, because we have Myanmar here. And how does that fit into the inter-Korean relationship? Now, multipolarity means that South Korea, in fact, working closely, not against China, certainly not, against China, and working cooperation with Russia, with China, and developing working toward multipolarity will be more conducive to also addressing what you call even nuclear issue. So that should be the path that South Korea should take. Supporting multipolarity, resist America's hegemonic unipolar system, and by empowering those Koreans within South Korea who are supporting that path and working with expanding our alliances with, like you, people in the United States, who are also vigorously contesting against the U.S. pretty much self-destructive unipolar, quest.
Okay, next is Norma, followed by last question will be from Sharon. If you keep it to 2 minutes, we're running out of time. So Norma, please go ahead.
As I posted in the chat for anybody who's interested, the United States has been in wars of conquest, not only all my life, but long before that. We have been at war constantly. That people don't get it amazes me. Well, we're forced not to see the whole picture. I'd like to know if anybody disagrees with the idea that everybody needs to know we are always at war of taking over the world. And I put my email in there for you to tell me you don't agree if you want to. And thank you very much. Of course, the presentation is, right with my heart and great content. And KJ No is one of our yay people.
Thank you, Norma. So the last question will be from Sharon, if you would unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Simone. I would like to go back to the I definitely agree that we, the peace forces in this country, need to be in solidarity with Korea's quest for independence. And I would like to go back to the question of that was raised earlier about, and it was certainly in the chat for a while, that part of the U.S. working class works in the war production. A lot of the U.S. working class works in war production. And what do you say to them? And I think we need to think about that hard. So it can't just be, well, what if we didn't spend all that money on war production, we could spend it on helping poor people and building better housing and ending homelessness and hunger in our country out of the goodness of our hearts. It often sounds like that. I think that it is objectively the case that humankind, and in particular the people of the United States, will never overcome global warming, will never get in control of the warming of this planet without a huge more additional investment. So that money that goes for war production should be going to converting everything to what is the right word? Healthy climate production of electricity and doing away with the use of fossil fuels, leaving it all in the ground is what we need to do, is leave it in the ground from here on out. And so I think that intersection of the peace movement and the climate movement or the environmental movement needs to be much better articulated and put forth as a solution, not just here, but globally. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that, you know, our dear governor, Gavin Newsom, is fond of talking about the fact that California, if we were our own nation, we would be the 5th largest economy in the world, or whatever it is, blah, blah, blah. And what always gets me is, so I want to say to him, well, what are you planning on doing about that? Instead of just talking about it as some abstraction. One thing we could do is have California citizenship and work permits for everybody in the state. Forget about ICE, right? But another thing we should be thinking of, if we were our own nation, we would be on the Eastern Pacific. We would be a power of the Eastern Pacific. And what would we do about that? What would be our foreign policy toward the Western Pacific and all of Asia? We should think outside the box, is what I'm trying to say about that, and raise that issue wherever we can as part of what our peace movement is raising nationally. And even without California becoming its own country, it's still true that the U.S. is the Eastern Pacific power, and we should be, instead of pivot toward Asia to extract as much profit from Asia, we should talk about what is a pivot toward the Asian people to be in solidarity with them.
Can I add one line I didn't get in there? It's just that we are told to approach everything in segments, as though any of these is separate from the other, and it's all one big ball of, well, horror and beauty.
Okay, so Simone, if you could just, if you have some closing comments, it's time, our time is up, but go ahead. If you have any final words you'd like to say, please go ahead.
Yes, it has been truly an honor and pleasure to join this forum. It's incredibly inspiring, and I thank you so much. And I just wanted to stress that a little bit, maybe it's still maybe pessimistic note. It is really there's a real possibility of a war right now, and the Biden administration seems to be really determined to use military to drive a new Cold War in Asia, and as we point out, as you point out yourself, and pretty much isolate and economically, weaken China and against their multipolarity. And despite all the rhetorics, U.S. has zero interest, in my view, in peace in Korea for the reasons that I just mentioned for the last hour or so. And United States use North Korea threat as an excuse to continue this permanent war economy at the military industrial complex at the apex. So that is I think it's important to bear in mind. And moreover, at this particular juncture, peace in Korea, I hope in the other way, but it will never be possible as long as the United States engages in this new Cold War with China. So the scenario that you have here is that you kind of somehow caused Beijing into invading Taiwan, and they did American national security analysts that wrote the scenario, and then turning Taiwan into U.S. base for future military operation in the region. So in other words, and then still at the same time, it's about defending democracy, human rights, and then China as the biggest threat, and then now Tokyo, South Korea, and Japan are fully lying behind it. So that is what's going on. And so Americans, Washington's war preparation, which is well underway right now, and U.S. is building also those unequal alliances throughout the Indo-Pacific, including Korea and Japan, and even New Zealand and Australia. So, so as long as threat of war with China exists, no, and the peace in Korea is not going to be possible, and even if, let's suppose, there's no war within the next few years, so what's going to happen is it's going to fuel the further militarization of the entire Asian region, and also this part of our country. Right? And how that's going to affect us in the United States, in Seattle, or Los Angeles and whatnot. It is going to impact because simple math, the budget will be more on defense, more on this aggressive military campaign, and less on the well-being of improving the lives of ordinary Americans. So I think that this is where we need to really stress. It's not just about Korea. It's not just about Ukraine. It's about us. It's about us, people living in the United States, whose lives are directly impacted. And we can go all the way back to the first statement that I quoted, that was a Luxemburg. But there is a possibility. Possibility is that you and I can be empowered. Working people, ordinary people in the United States opposed, completely against their interest, war can be prevented. And I think that is and also giving solidarity to South Korea. Right now, there's something that I was going to point out, I didn't mention. South Korea right now, their unions, Korea's largest trade union, Korean Confederation trade unions, engaging in general strike for the next 2 weeks. General strike. Right? Stopping, right? Literally contesting the capitalist oligarchic exploitation. Now, so what that means is that we wanted to support, right, those struggles that are right now happening in Korea. And those economic struggles, it's not just about improving life. It is, again, as I mentioned, in the context of Korea, it's about against the imperial domination that has direct impact. So I think that I thank you very much for this forum, and I'm hopeful. And as you know, the good old Chinese were saying that the crisis means opportunities. Often cited, sounds like cliche, but I think that's there's a hope. I think we can do it.
Thank you so much, Simone, for coming and speaking today. Thank you to all the participants who asked great questions and for the responses. Just want to put in another plug for next week. This is going to be a very interesting session next week. Alexander McKay from the UK talking about Putin and NATO. So join us next week. Sign up at our website, ICSSmarks.org.
Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Niebuhr Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses. Since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums, please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, @yahoo.com, and the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.